Hey everyone, and welcome to Stitch With Creations. This is a special swap collaboration between myself, who posted a gift package to Shelby KG, and Shelby KG posted a package to Silver Griffin, and in turn, Silver Griffin posted one to me. For this doll, I'm going to be using a 13 Wishes Draculaura doll. She's a bit old and tired, very well played with, her hair is super gluey, and her face is very stained from the glue. To get this rolling, I'm going to strip her of all her jewels, and then I'm going to cut off this icky hair. The hair had seeped through so much that it all came off in one massive glop. It was horrible. Now, rocking her stylish buzz cut, I'm going to give her some spa treatment by dunking her in some boiling water and softening all that horrible icky glue inside her head. With the water emptied out, I can take my screwdriver and start scraping those plugs out from the inside. There was a lot of glue in here and it was rock solid, so I opted for making a cut in the back of her head and pulling it all out, which was probably for the best because it came out in one massive clump. Now we've removed the big hairy poop, I can put her back in some hot water to try and close up those holes in her ear. Using acetone, I'm going to be wiping off her factory paint with a nice cotton swab. Then I get another cotton wool ball and dip it in the water and give it a wipe over and get the rest of that acetone off. I'm going to cut off her ears. I would suggest cutting away from the body, but I find I have more control if I do it like this. Yeah, looks dangerous. Using some thin floral wire, I'm going to be making an armature for some ears and some little horns, because we're going to be making a little fawn. I've measured and marked out where I want her horns to be, and I'm passing some wire through her head in two places and then poking it out of her neck hole. I'll be twisting those together, making sure they're nice and secure inside. I'm using some jewellery pliers and some needle-nosed pliers to twist the metal so it won't unfold, unravel and pop out of her head very easily. When I'm happy with the length, I can trim off the excess and pull them back through her head and give them a big twist so they're nice and secure on both ends and shape them into the shape I want. And with the power of editing, I've done both sides and I can move on to the ears. Similar principle, I'm going to poke them through the ears in two spots and through the neck hole, give them a twist, lock them into position, and then I can shape the ears into an armature that I like. I realised I'd made the ears too big, so I've looped them back on themselves, which gives them extra strength, and I'm using my jewellery pliers to shape them into the shape that I want, which is kind of like a lamb's ear. These don't have to be exact shape because I'll be sculpting on top with some Sculpey later. Now her armatures are all set, I can add the Fimo. This is a translucent white and I'm adding some Bacon Bond to make sure that they stick properly. I thought it just made it a little bit oily, but if it's made it stick better, even better. I feel the translucent clay looks more bone-like and a bit more realistic. Not that I'm going for realism here, it's fawn, but yeah, I like the effect it makes. I'm pinching and pulling the different shapes out for the different antlers, and then I'm going to be using my little sculpty tools with silicone ends and the metal ends to try and give it a bit of texture and make it a bit more realistic. I've used some Sculpey in a more fleshy colour to pad out the ears, and I'll be shaping those with a nicer silicone tool as well. The silicone tools let me blend things in a bit better because my chubby little fingers can't quite get into those little nooks and crannies. And then I do the same for the second ear. Little sandwich of clay over the armature and then sculpt it into shape. And we can now put her in the oven.
Yeah.
Please ignore the dirty glass on my oven. I did try and clean it, but it just went streaky. After it's 15 minutes in the oven at 135 degrees, I take her out and her head is a little squishy, but everything else is nice and solid. As this little creature's a fawn, I'm going to have to modify her legs a little bit. So I've watched quite a lot of Doll Motions videos, and I quite like the simplicity of snipping into the backs of the calves and padding it out and building it back up again with some epoxy sculpt. Now, after my nearly losing a finger issue on my Spider Queen, I am sticking to my pipe cutters, and even though it's just a little bit, I can wiggle it around and I don't have any fear of losing any limbs. It just takes a little bit of back and forth, getting the right pressure and not cutting all the way through, and wiggling it around, and then you can just bend it back. Look at that. I'm going to pad it out with some tin foil just to make sure that the space is still there while I put the epoxy sculpt on, because I don't want it to just squish out if it gets any pressure on it. To make sure it doesn't eke out, I'm padding it in so it's nice and tight. I'm adding a thin layer of epoxy over the top just to smooth it out and try and even out. I can sand it back later, which I don't need to because I'm going to be covering it with some fur. I'm back in there with the silicone tools, trying to smooth it all out. Past me forgot that we'll be covering it with fur, but I don't know. It's a nice finish, I guess. As always, I've made too much epoxy, so I'm going to be using this stick. I don't know what it's from. A stick. A sticky stick. And I'm going to be making Fawn a little staff. I wanted a nice and simple design, so I'm just rolling out little snakes of clay and I'm going to wrap them around so it's nice and twisty and wisty and pretty. I'm going to give it a nice base so it's got a proper top and a proper bottom. And then to give it a bit of whimsicality and a bit of sparkle, we're going to be using some nail art gems and shoving those in that clay while it's still squishy. I almost forgot she needs hooves, so I'm going to give this a first pass just to smooth out and give it a basic shape with some more epoxy sculpt. I'm trying to make sure that it's nice and flat on the bottom as well and covers up all of the toes and doesn't give any sort of big lumpy bumps on the bottom. After that's cured, I can go in with a second pass. This is the next day, and I'm giving her a cloven hoof, so I'm going to be splitting that bit down the middle and giving it a bit of shape and detail. I've also added a little bit of detail underneath so you can see where the toes and the feet and the frog and the other bits and pieces that make up hooves go. After a generous layer of MSC, I'm going to be pasteling on some white because I want to get rid of some of that yellowing from the glue on the head. Now I've evened out the skin tone, I can start adding some shadows with the beige and some blush with the pinks on her cheeks and the little nose. Although these faces are sculpted, it's still nice to be able to bring out some of the depth with some of the pasteling. So I'll always make sure that the eye sockets are given a bit of depth with the different shades of pastels. I imagine this little fawn being out in the frost in the cold winter's mornings, so she's going to be a bit frostbitten and her cheeks are going to be nice and flushed and rosy. And not forgetting to give her a little black nose, because it's cute. I'm just using a kneaded eraser just to get rid of some of the black bits that have gone a little bit too far and strayed onto her top lip. giving her a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow. And I'm just turning up the sides of her mouth to make her look a little bit more cheerful. Using some white acrylic, I'm going to paint her ears, because using fleshy coloured Sculpey was useless, and we're going to be painting them a different colour and covering them in some little fur later. And they're all done. Back to the face, I'm going to be putting some of the cold colours in now, so bits of blues and purples in the temples and on the sort of extreme parts of her face, because we naturally have blues, greens and purples in our skin tones, and it gives it a bit more life, I feel. With the base layer of blushing done, I can start to sketch out her eyes. I wanted to go for big, doughy, sweet eyes this time, and so she's going to have some nice big round eyes. With a nice big shape I'm happy with, I've also sketched in some eyebrows. I'm back on the blushing, and I realised looking at different faces in the winter, it was flipping cold here. I think it was about -3 at some point. Your face doesn't just blush in the cold, it goes all mottled as well, so I thought I'd do a little bit of experimenting, and I'm using my eyelash spoolies and I'm just dotting on some different colours, blushing it back a bit, blending it, but I thought it gave a really nice effect. Also, Quavers crisps are a top snack. While that last layer of MSC is drying, I'm going to start on the clothes. This is going to be a cloak. This is a blue velvet in some Hobbycraft multi-pack fat quarters I got, and I'm just sketching out a cloak. So I folded it into 4, and at the centre is the centre of the back. I'll be cutting 2 of those out and then take one of those and cut those in half to make the front, if that makes sense. I don't have a pattern for this, so I'm just using a doll's body to scale it up, making sure that I've got it at the right length and it'll cover her shoulders. The hood is based off Delightful's oversized hoodie pattern, but I've turned it into a big pixie hood. There's a bit that gets folded back to make sure that you can poke the hair through, and then I'm just sewing up the seam in the middle. I snip out the tip, and then I can turn it the right way out and it'll have a proper pointy end rather than a bit of a nubby end. And once that's done, I can add the hood to the cloak. To break up the blushing a bit, I'm adding some white spots. They also act as little freckles as well. This was the point that the MSC started being an absolute git and was drying shiny. Even if I did stick the can somewhere warm, it still wasn't drying quite right, and it took another couple of layers to get it back to the finish that I needed. When the MSC dries and it's shiny, it's really hard to get anything to grip to it, so I've resorted to dipping a paintbrush into water and taking the pigment straight off the pencil and painting it on. You have to paint it on in really thin layers, otherwise it just scrapes off on your next layer. It's really frustrating. MSC at the wrong time of year is very stroppy. It's very moody, and it will do as and when it pleases, a cure as how it feels. It's a bit of a poo. With a fresh layer of MSC, hopefully this one's a bit more toothy, I'm going to start trying to draw in some more of her features. As you can see, the pencils are still not quite doing it, it's still not quite gripping it, it's quite frustrating. This is another layer of MSC. This one has been warmed up quite nicely in the can, and it's working a little better. I'm just deepening those eye sockets and making her look a bit more doughy-eyed. I'm back to pulling pigment straight off the pencil again. For some reason it just was not playing. I was getting quite frustrated and I was running out of time because we had a deadline to meet. So I'm just adding a brown wash to the horns. I'm going to be dragging it up, and then I'll be doing a second pass at the bottom, making it deeper and darker. Once the dark layer's on, I can start adding a little bit of white and dragging it back down to try and blend it out and make the tips seem brighter. I didn't realise my camera had died at this point, and I'd gone ahead quite a fair bit, but I'd had to resort to using some acrylic paints to finish her eyes off because the MSC was just not playing ball. But actually, it looks really sweet. It makes her eyes look really deep and really, really sweet. I'm just adding some resin to her eyes to give them a bit of shine. I prefer using resin because it means you get shiny eyes like this that have natural catch lights. I'm using some amazing natural fibres for her hair, and rather than plugging it in, because I couldn't separate it enough to make plugs, I'm just gluing it straight on in the little wefts it came with. I'm using some high-tack Fabri-Tac glue and smushing the glue into it and moulding it to her head. These fibres are from a company called Tregava Fibres. They have a shop on Etsy. I will link them in the description box below. This is one of their mystery bundles. I got a massive bag of random bits of hair that have been dip-dyed and in different types of finishes, and I picked all the greeny blues, icy whites to go on this doll. I'm putting the hair on facing the wrong way, When this is dried, I'll be flipping this piece of hair, particularly, over the back of her head and into sort of a half up, half down hairdo. But this is the best way to get a more natural hairline with this kind of fibre. And that's her head covered. Once these bits have dried at the front, I'll flip them over and tie them back. I found some fabric that looks like curly sheep's skin fur, so I'm going to do a very quick cover up using some Yoo-hoo glue and avoiding, excuse me, yeah, that's right, wipe it away. We're not covering the joints, covering the legs, but not to the joints. I'm going to be covering the legs in this beautiful fur. I'd initially only stuck them to the outside, just so I've got some grip, and now I'm going to cover the inside of the leg with the glue and glue it together. And then once that's dry, I can trim it back so it is the right size. And they still move lovely. I ended up making a little pinafore dress out of some very thin cord that I had. Initially I was going to make her some little bloomers out of the same stuff, but this fabric was so stiff that the bloomers just ended up being so rigid that she couldn't move her legs. It was a bit too hard. I initially made a tube and then cut it to shape to fit around her body. I've put a square panel on the front, and then I've made some straps, and using some tiny fastenings that I got from I Sew for Doll, I'm going to be making the little buckles as well. Using this trim, I've just turned the top over and made a tube. I'm going to put some elastic through it and made a little petticoat. The shirt pattern is a GG Requiem pattern, and I'm just using the basic pattern to make a nice white shirt to go underneath her little pinafore. Following the instructions, I've put darts in the front of the shirt, and then I shall be adding the shoulders at the top on both sides. I pin and ease the sleeve tops in, and I will hand sew the tops that it sleeves in. I find that if I put it in the sewing machine, it tends to get eaten up. Once both sleeves are in, I can sew up the sides and then turn them the right way out. Now time to put the head back on the body. I always like to trim the neck peg down because I just feel like it's excess plastic that's not needed in there. I heat the head up with a hairdryer, and then I can gently squeeze it back on to the neck peg. Now her head's not going to roll around so easily. I'm going to add this soft fleece that I've got. Just a simple squirt of Yoo-hoo glue. Stick it on after I've spread it around. And once that's dry, I can trim it right back into its right size. Now it's all trimmed, they do look a little chunky, but they are so fluffy, it's very cute. Now her head's on, I can get her shirt on her. I've put some Velcro on the back so it fastens up. Stick her hands back on because you can't get many clothes on without hands being in the way. Now I put the petticoat on, and I will take the petticoat off again after I realised that it's not going to work. So, pinafore on, then petticoat. Now I can do up the clasps that keep coming undone. So I'm just going to stitch those on. We can pretend that they work properly, yeah? Yeah, we'll pretend. And I forgot hooves. So, a quick paint of black on those hooves. Yeah, right underneath as well. Yep, beautiful. Lovely. And then once those are dry, I will give them a bit of a dry brush in a lighter colour. Now we've got magic and sparkle, and now we've got a little bell on the end of her hood. It does make a little jingly noise. So we're just going to hand sew that little beastie on. Now I've got a little clasp that I found in my stash box for some LARP kit that I was going to make that never happened, and so we're going to sew that to the cloak so she's got a little fastening. It's the little things that make it look finished. With her hair dried, I can start styling it. I'm just grabbing some of the top bits and tying it into a little half up, half down with a little bow. And I'm going to call that done. Here are her photos. I gave her staff a bit of a gold dry brush. Let me know what you think of her. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this a thumbs up if you like it. I love reading all your comments, and if you want to subscribe for more stuff, please do. I will see you very soon in another video sharing what my partner sent me, and it's glorious. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.